When I was clearing out my late husband's workshop, I found a metal lockbox hidden behind a false panel in the back of his storage cabinet. The note taped to the lid read, "For Lucille. Do not let Desmond see this. Find Mr. Ellery at Cornerstone Bank, 224 Ridgemont Avenue." Inside was a small brass key, and what I found at that address changed everything I thought I understood about the last 5 years of my marriage. Hello, dear friends. I'm Lucille, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Please stay until the end. And if this story moves you, leave me a comment and tell me where you're listening from. It means more to me than you know. My husband Vincent and I were married for 43 years. We met in the spring of 1981 at a church rummage sale in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was buying a toolbox. I was selling pies. He paid $2 more than the asking price and told me it was for the crust. I thought, this man pays attention to things. I was right about that for the rest of his life. Vincent was a machinist by trade. He spent 32 years at the same manufacturing plant outside of town, rising from the floor-to-floor supervisor, then retiring early when his knees gave out at 61. After that, he turned our detached garage into a proper workshop. He organized it the way only engineers organize things. Pegboards, labeled bins, hand tools arranged by size. He went out there most mornings with his coffee and came back inside smelling like sawdust and WD-40. I never questioned it. A man needs somewhere to think. We raised our daughter Rochelle in a brick ranch house on Caldwell Road. She was our only child, born the year after we married. Vincent doted on her in the quiet way he did everything. Not with grand gestures, but with presence. He fixed her bicycle, coached her softball team for 2 summers, drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to move her into her first apartment. He was there. That was his way of saying everything. Rochelle married Desmond when she was 34. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming loudly, specifically when it suited him. He sold commercial real estate, or he had until the market softened in 2019. Since then, he'd been in what he called transitional phases, more or less continuously. Each phase involved a new opportunity he was excited about. Each opportunity, as far as I could observe, involved other people's money going somewhere it never quite came back from. Vincent never said an unkind word about Desmond to my face, but he had stopped volunteering to be alone in a room with him sometime around 2020. I had noticed that. I had not said anything about it because it was one of those things that felt better left unnamed. Vincent died on a Thursday in October, a massive heart attack, swift and complete. He had complained of fatigue for 3 weeks. I had scheduled a doctor's appointment. He never got to keep it. The grief was not what I expected. I had always imagined grief as something that crashed over you, a single wave. What I got instead was like water rising slowly, room by room. I managed, I moved through the days, I thanked people for the casseroles. I sat in his chair in the evenings and watched the news he used to watch and felt the particular weight of a silence that used to be a person. By February, 4 months after the funeral, I was ready to start on the workshop. I had been putting it off. It felt like the last room that was still fully his. I worked through it methodically, the way he would have wanted. Donated the tools he wouldn't have wanted, wasted to the vocational school 3 blocks away, kept the ones with weight attached to them. It was on a Tuesday afternoon when I was emptying the tall wooden storage cabinet in the back corner, the one that had lived in that spot since the 90s, that I found it. The cabinet had a false bottom on the upper shelf. I only discovered it because one of the bins I pulled out shifted a panel slightly. Behind it sat a metal lockbox, gray and dull, the lid taped shut with a folded note on top. For Lucille. Do not let Desmond see this. Find Mr. Ellery at Cornerstone Bank, 24 Ridgemont Avenue. He'll know what to do. I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner. All my love, always. V. I stood in that workshop for a long time without moving. I should tell you what had been happening in the months since Vincent died, because it matters. Desmond had started calling within 2 weeks of the funeral. Not to check on me, or not only that. The calls had a shape to them. He would begin with concern, move to practicalities, and end somewhere near the subject of finances. He asked twice in the first month whether Vincent had left a will. I told him yes, that I was the sole beneficiary and executor, which was true. He made a sound like nodding over the phone. Then he asked whether I'd thought about what I was going to do with the house. I told him I was going to live in it. Rochelle didn't push the way Desmond did, but she relayed his suggestions with a tone she'd developed over 10 years of marriage to him. Apologetic, slightly rehearsed, like she wasn't entirely convinced of what she was saying but had agreed to say it. She mentioned that a financial advisor Desmond knew had suggested a widow in her late 60s might benefit from consolidating assets. She mentioned that Desmond had a contact at an estate planning firm. She said, with some discomfort I could hear even through the phone, that Desmond felt the family should be involved in major decisions. I had given them grace. I know grief makes people reach for control. I had tried to believe their concern was genuine, even when it landed strangely. But now I was holding a lockbox with Vincent's handwriting on top, and beneath it, a small brass key. I did not open the box in the workshop. I took it inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and set it in front of me. I read the note again 3 more times. Do not let Desmond see this. Vincent, who had never spoken a harsh word about Desmond in my presence, had written those 5 words deliberately. That told me something I couldn't unfold all at once. Inside the lockbox were the key, a folded slip of paper with Mr. Ellery's name and address, and a handwritten document, 2 pages in Vincent's small, careful print. I won't reproduce all of it. Some of it belongs only to us. But the substance was this. He had opened an account at Cornerstone Bank 11 years ago, separate from our joint accounts. He had been investing quietly, mutual funds, a small commercial rental property in a town called Fairfield about 40 minutes east, and a portion in bond positions he'd researched. On evenings, I assumed he was simply reading. Everything in the account was mine, the letter said. It had always been meant for me. He had kept it separate, not because he was hiding something from me, but because he was protecting it from someone else. He had seen Desmond clearly. He had watched the way Desmond talked about money, always other people's money, always moving toward something that never materialized. He had watched Rochelle change in ways that worried him. Not her character, he wrote, but her vision. She had come to see security as something that arrived through Desmond rather than something built independently. And he feared that if the full picture of their savings were visible, it would become a target before I had any protection in place. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after I finished reading. Then I cried, not from devastation, but from the particular ache of being known. Vincent had carried this alone for 11 years. He had trusted me to find it. He had trusted me to know what to do. I made 3 decisions before I went to sleep that night. First, I would go to Cornerstone Bank alone. I would ask for Mr. Ellery by name and tell no one about the visit until I understood the full picture. Second, I would find my own attorney, not Desmond's contact, my own. There was a woman named Vance, Claudia Vance, who had handled the estate of my neighbor's husband 2 years before. My neighbor had spoken very highly of her. I had kept her card in the kitchen drawer. I found it that same night. Third, I would say nothing to Rochelle or Desmond. I would be warm. I would be the grieving mother-in-law they expected, but I would not be careless with what I now held. I arrived at Cornerstone Bank when it opened the following morning. The lobby was quiet, wood-paneled, the kind of place that hadn't changed its carpet in 20 years. I asked for Miss Ellery at the front desk and watched the teller's expression shift almost imperceptibly. The small adjustment of someone who has been told to expect a particular visitor. Mr. Ellery was perhaps 65, compact and deliberate, with the unhurried manner of a man who had spent decades understanding that the contents of his vault mattered to people in ways no balance sheet could measure. He led me to a private office and closed the door. "Mrs. Lucille," he said, "I'm glad you came. Vincent told me it might take a few months. He said to wait for you." "You knew him well?" I asked. "He came in twice a year. We had coffee." He folded his hands on the desk. "He was a precise man. He cared about you very much. He said so plainly every time." The account was larger than I had anticipated. the investment ledger Vincent had maintained, kept separately in Mr. Ellery's safe. Another layer of his caution showed a total current value of $318,000, not including the rental income from the Fairfield property, which had been accumulating for 9 years in an account under both our names that I had never known existed. I photographed every document. I sat in that small office longer than I had planned. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the wheel and the radio off. I thought about a man who had spent 11 years building something invisible to protect the person he loved most from someone who would have treated it as a claim. That afternoon, Desmond called. His voice was easy, practiced. He mentioned the estate planning contact again. He mentioned that he and Rochelle had been discussing whether a smaller property might make more financial sense for me. He said it was just something to consider. He said he was just keeping an eye out. I told him I appreciated it. I kept my voice warm. The moment I hung up, I dialed Ms. Vance. Claudia Vance had an office above a print shop on Merchant Street. She was 61, wore her gray hair in a short practical cut, and had the quality of a woman who had never once needed anyone to be impressed by her. I laid everything on her desk: the photographs, the ledger, the key, Vincent's letters, the property documents. She read carefully. She asked 4 questions, then she leaned back. "Vincent was thorough," she said. "This is a clean transfer. Everything is legally yours. There's no ambiguity here." She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "What you're describing with your son-in-law isn't a legal threat yet, but it has the shape of one if you're not ahead of it. Let's get ahead of it." We spent 2 hours together. By the end, I had a plan. Ms. Vance would file formal probate on all assets, including the previously unlisted ones, transferring everything cleanly into my name. The Fairfield property would be appraised and placed under professional management. The investment accounts would be consolidated under my direction with a financial advisor she trusted. And we would create a documented record that I had sought independent legal counsel freely without any other party's involvement. That last piece, she said, was the shield. I executed each step over the following 2 weeks, quietly and steadily, while continuing to answer Rochelle's calls with warmth and Desmond's with patience. I said nothing about what I was doing. I was not deceptive. I was careful. There is a difference, and I have thought about it many times since. It was Desmond who figured it out first. He called on a Wednesday, and his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. Something flat and controlled had taken its place. He said he'd heard through a contact that I had visited Cornerstone Bank. He said he and Rochelle felt they had a right to be part of any financial decisions involving the family estate. He used the word family 4 times in 5 sentences. I said that Vincent had designated me as sole executor and beneficiary, and that I was handling everything with proper legal counsel. He was welcome to review the probate filing as public record. He paused. Then, "Lucille, we're not adversaries. There's no reason to involve lawyers." "There's every reason," I said pleasantly. "Good evening, Desmond." Rochelle called 20 minutes later. She sounded the way she got when she was caught between 2 things she couldn't fully defend. She said Desmond was just trying to help. She said she hoped I wasn't shutting her out. Her voice carried that rehearsed quality, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Something that sounded like a question she was afraid to ask herself. I told her I loved her. I told her I was handling things carefully and that I needed a little time. She said quietly, "Mom, is there something you're not telling me?" "There are things I'm still understanding myself," I said. "When I understand them, I'll talk to you." That was as honest as I could be. The threat came 10 days later. Desmond called and said in a level voice that he had spoken to an attorney who believed there were grounds to challenge Vincent's estate. He said Vincent's behavior in his final years, the separate account, the secrecy, suggested possible cognitive decline. He said he didn't want to go that route. He said he hoped I would be reasonable before it came to that. Ms. Vance had prepared me for this. I said, "That's your right to pursue. Any communication from this point should go through Ms. Vance. Her number is publicly listed." I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. My hands were cold. My voice had not wavered, but my hands were cold. I called my granddaughter Piper that evening. She was 22, living in Austin, working her first real job. She had texted me 2 weeks earlier, "Grandma, I don't know what's going on, but I'm on your side if you need one." I hadn't called her then because I hadn't wanted to put her in the middle, but her message had stayed with me because it told me that whatever was happening inside Rochelle and Desmond's house, it was not unanimous. She answered on the first ring. "Grandma, I need to tell you some things," I said, "and then I'd like you to just be my granddaughter for a few minutes. Not anyone's daughter. Can you do that?" A pause, then yes, always. We talked for an hour. She was careful with her words and didn't criticize her parents directly. But she told me enough. She said she had walked in on conversations she hadn't been meant to hear. About money, about the house, about what Vincent had probably left behind. She said she'd felt sick about it and hadn't known what to do. She said she was glad I called. I didn't ask her to take sides. I asked her to stay in my life. She said she wasn't going anywhere. The formal challenge arrived on a Monday morning in November. Ms. Vance called before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. She sounded exactly as I'd hoped, calm, prepared, faintly satisfied. "They've alleged cognitive impairment," she said, citing the existence of the undisclosed account as evidence of irrational behavior. "They're seeking redistribution under standard succession laws." "What's our position?" I asked. "Excellent," she said. "I've been building it for 3 weeks." Our response was comprehensive. Vincent's medical records from his final 2 years showed no evidence of cognitive impairment. A signed letter from Mr. Ellery at Cornerstone Bank attested to 11 years of consistent, organized quarterly visits with no observable confusion or declining capacity. The investment ledger itself, maintained with the precision of a fully capable engineer up to the month before his death, spoke plainly on his behalf. And then there were Desmond's financial records, obtained through the discovery process. What they showed was not complicated. He had run his commercial real estate LLC into significant debt. He'd had borrowed against Rochelle's salary in ways she had not been fully informed of. He had been searching for liquidity for 2 years. He had not been worried about Vincent's mental state. He had been worried about access to the money. Ms. Vance showed me those records the Thursday before the hearing. I read them once and set them down. "He didn't know what was actually in the account," I said. "No, he only knew something existed. That was enough." The hearing took place in a small probate courtroom. No gallery to speak of, just the judge, the attorneys, a court reporter, and us. Rochelle and Desmond sat on one side with their attorney between them. Rochelle was not looking at me when I walked in. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was studying the table in front of her. Ms. Vance presented our case without theatrics. Medical records, Mr. Ellery's letter, the ledger. She was methodical and unhurried and entirely convincing, the way the truth tends to be when it has been properly assembled. Then she introduced Desmond's financial records. His attorney asked for a recess. 10 minutes were granted. During that recess, I watched Rochelle. She was very still, not calm, but emptied, in the way a person becomes when something inside them has gone quiet. She was reading documents that had just been handed to her, and I watched something move across her face that I recognized. It was the particular look of understanding something you have been not quite allowing yourself to understand. When the hearing resumed, Desmond took the stand. He was asked to describe specific instances of Vincent's alleged confusion. He could not. He could describe moments when Vincent had been tired, had been short with people, had moved more slowly than usual. Under Ms. Vance's cross-examination, each instance contracted back to its actual size, an aging man's difficult days, not cognitive decline. Ms. Vance asked whether Desmond had ever raised his concerns about Vincent's mental capacity with any of his physicians while Vincent was alive. A pause. "No," Desmond said. "Did you raise them with your wife at any point during his illness?" Another pause, longer. not in those terms. So these concerns arose after Vincent's death, after you became aware of assets not listed in the original probate filing. Desmond's jaw moved. I was worried about Lucille. Of course, Ms. Vance said. Nothing further. The judge ruled that afternoon. The petition was denied in its entirety. The estate remained exactly as filed, wholly in my name, exactly as Vincent had intended. The judge noted that the evidence of Vincent's mental acuity was thorough, consistent, and supported by documentation spanning more than a decade. He noted that the timing of the challenge and the financial circumstances of the petitioner undermined the stated basis for the claim. That last sentence sat in the courtroom for a moment after it was read. Ms. Vance shook my hand in the corridor, brief, firm. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a while, then I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since October. Outside, November was doing what November does. Gray, quiet, the world indifferent to outcomes. I drove home. That was the right way for it to end, ordinary and complete. The weeks afterward arrived quietly. Desmond's attorney withdrew from the case. The Fairfield property went under professional management and was generating reliable income by December. Ms. Vance's final invoice came with a short handwritten note that said only, "Vincent chose well. So did you." I framed it and hung it in my study. Rochelle called 10 days after the hearing and asked if she could come over. She came alone. We sat at the kitchen table where Vincent and I had eaten 10,000 breakfasts, and she talked for a long time. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't understood what she was participating in. She told me she had found out, in the days since the hearing, the full extent of Desmond's borrowing, against accounts she had believed were shared savings for their future. She said she had been afraid for a long time and hadn't known where to put the fear. I let her talk until she had said everything she needed to say. "Are we all right?" she asked finally. Her voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. It sounded like herself, the version that had existed before she'd learned to perform certainty she didn't feel. "We will be," I said. "Not right this minute, but we will be." She nodded. She was crying quietly, without performing it. I handed her a dish towel because I didn't have tissues on the table, and she laughed slightly through the tears the way she'd always laughed at inconvenient things. That laugh I recognized. I had missed it. "Dad knew, didn't he?" she said. "It wasn't entirely a question." "He knew what he needed to protect," I said, "and he loved you too. That's why he never said it out loud." She came back for dinner the following Sunday. We cooked together. Piper drove up from Austin a couple of weekends later, and the three of us sat on the back porch until it got too cold and then moved inside and sat there anyway. Desmond was not present. Rochelle was working through some things with a counselor. I told her that was wise and didn't ask for details. I was her mother, not her therapist. Those are not the same thing, though the line can blur. By the new year, everything was settled and clean. The investment accounts were under my management. The rental income from Fairfield arrived each month without drama. I was not wealthy in the way the word usually implies, but I had the quiet ease of a woman who no longer has to count small things, and I understood now that this was exactly what Vincent had been building toward. Not extravagance, just the absence of low-level fear. I kept his workshop as a workspace. I wasn't ready to give it up entirely. I put a small table by the window where his old coffee mug still sat, and I did my correspondence there in the mornings, with the light coming in from the east, the way it had when he was the one in the room. I want to say something plainly before I close, something I have thought about many times since that Tuesday afternoon in February when I found a metal box hidden behind a false panel in a wooden cabinet. A man who spends 11 years quietly protecting someone is not hiding from her. He is paying attention in the way that love pays attention. Not loudly, not with speeches, but continuously, through every ordinary morning and every ordinary Tuesday, in the small, careful choices that accumulate over time into something large enough to hold the person he loves when the storm arrives. Vincent believed I would know what to do. He was right about that, too. And if you are listening to this today and someone in your life has ever looked at your grief and seen an opening, I want you to know what he understood and what I learned. That is not strength they are mistaking for weakness. It is simply grief, and grief, when it has finished with you, leaves you clearer than you were before, steadier in ways you did not expect, more certain of who you are and what you are willing to protect. He was brave enough in the end. I tried to be worthy of it. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from today. I read everyone.